Delighted to welcome you all to this curtain raiser, the opening discussion, and it's aptly titled The Moment of Truth, because I guess this is where we are today in our global journeys. And of course, we are going to be focusing on some particular relationships and how they're responding to the churn that we are witnessing. And to lead us to this moment of churn, let me hand over to Mr. Sanjay Joshi, Chairman of the Observer Research Foundation, the host organization. And he is going to be introducing the panel and the theme that we are engaging on. So, Mr. Joshi, may I turn this over to you?
Welcome to this curtain raiser for Raisina. Now, Raisina is actually, when the dialogue starts on the first day, it's a very stressful time. That's why the curtain raiser is about the stress test. Well, hopefully we shall overcome the stress in the next 3 days, and the world shall overcome the stress it is in eventually. But to begin this discussion, we have a great panel with us today, which is, I'll quickly introduce them. Starting, why don't you introduce Szu? Start with yourself. Szu from the Taiwan Democracy Foundation.
Yes, my name is Szu-Chien Szu. The title in Raisina Dialogue is an advisor to Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, and I also carry another government official capacity, the Deputy Secretary General of National Security Council. Thank you.
Władysław.
Hello, my name is Władysław Bartoszewski. I'm a Secretary of State in the Foreign Ministry of Poland. I'm responsible for all of Asia, the Asia Pacific, and also for the most former Soviet Union countries.
Steve.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Steve Began. I'm a Senior Vice President with the Boeing Company. I run the company's global public policy portfolio. Before that, I served in President Trump's first term as his chief negotiator with North Korea, and also for the last 2 years of his administration as the Deputy Secretary of State under Mike Pompeo.
Then you have Caroline.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Albrecht, Managing Director of the Berlin Global Dialogue. We're a new forum established in Berlin 2 years ago to bring business and government together against the geopolitical changes that we're seeing across the world.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Valbona Zanelli. I'm a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council, Europe Center, and Scotgrove Center for Security and Strategy. Before that, I was with the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies.
So this is a time when we talk to anybody, go anywhere, you can see a lot of anxiety around the place. I was recently in Japan and everyone's worried. Europe is worried. Taiwan, I don't know, we'll talk to Szu about it. That seems to be in the center of the eye of the storm. It is a stressful time because it seems you are driving on one of Delhi's roads where no rules are obeyed and anyone does anything they want to do. A time when it seems that nations believe that, forget having friends or enemies. It's nothing about friends or enemies. It's just about what are the most dominant interests. And these interests keep on shifting. So difficult times, so how do we make sense of it? A tough task this panel has in the next 45 minutes to sort this out. So let me start with you, Szu. You are in the eye of the storm. No. Taiwan has been the kind of epicenter of the global supply chains. It's become a force to reckon with in the semiconductor industry. At one time, everyone was wooing it. And now things are changing. Alliances are under threat. How do you feel from Taiwan about the security and the investment climate? Where are you going from here?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you described, we're, so to speak, in the eye of the storm. I hope I look stressful. However, I don't feel that. Has to do with the fact that we have been in this position for decades. This is not new. We've been threatened by the Chinese Communist Party regime for many, many years, at least since my childhood. Please don't guess my age. But so this is part of our everyday life. So when this kind of things go on, as you mentioned earlier, when you go to Taipei, what you see is normalcy, right? Because we have to have a normal life in order to be vibrant and resilient, where at the same time, we still care very much about our self-defense. The fact that we have both economic development and the security self-defense is very deeply printed in our DNA.
But quick question, for example, TSMC has just announced a $100 billion investment in the USA. So is there a worry now that if capital is going to go out, what happens to the foundry industry has been the basis for that momentum of the Taiwanese economy? Employing people, getting people occupied, and that has been the life and blood. Now, if they start going out, what happens? How do you handle that?
Thank you. So most of the chips that TSMC as a company manufactured is in the category of the advanced semiconductor chips. So at the same time, most of other semiconductor foundry, actually they are producing legacy chips. So more than 90% of the advanced semiconductor chips in the world is produced by TSMC. So the question is, if it goes abroad, it doesn't only go to Arizona. It started with Kumamoto in Japan and Dresden in Germany. Arizona first, Kumamoto and Dresden. And now they're going to expand their investment in Arizona again. The fact that they are going global is actually inevitable because TSMC is a private company to start with. It's not driven by the government. So they make their own decisions. So the reason why they go certain country to invest is driven by the market. They only go to the market where there is market needs, demand. So when they decide to go somewhere, they already know their market share. And the reason why TSMC would like to expand their manufacturing in US has to do with the fact that we are going to step into an AI-driven economy. And the demand for the advanced chips for AI is gigantic. The CEO of TSMC, Mr. C.C. Wei, already said, despite all the investments TSMC made in US, Japan, Germany, and in Taiwan, are still not enough to meet the demand. So no, it won't hollow out what we have in Taiwan. Actually, the talents, the electricity, the land, and everything in Taiwan are not enough to support such a huge demand from the whole world. The most important thing is we still would like TSMC to keep the most advanced manufacturing and R&D in Taiwan. So the headquarters of TSMC in Taiwan still has the leadership.
Okay, I'll come back to those further questions on that later, but let me go on to Władysław. Poland, sir, has been, is kind of becoming more and more, ever since the Ukraine war, the front line of European security, as far as European perceptions go. And if I recall, last month, around mid-February, Secretary of Defense Peter Hiskett was there, and he said very clearly that Poland is the model ally, the model partner. Now, Europe is actually very disturbed, very worried about what is happening to the transatlantic alliance. What do you think is happening? Is there a reset button being pressed and complete perceptions of the security architecture, relationships across the transatlantic that is going to be affected? Or it is just a recalibration and it is going to get back to the old architecture, the old framework?
I think there's severe danger that it's not going to go back to the current framework, because there are agents who think that the international rule-based order set up in San Francisco in 1945, it's not suitable for them. I mean, there is a danger. Yes, you mentioned Poland. Yes, in terms of Americans' expectations, America expected since the days of President Clinton followed by Obama, Biden, and of course now President Trump first and in second. America expects that European members of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance will contribute to their defense. It was 2014, after the first invasion of Russia onto Ukraine, that the treaty said every member, of which there were then 30, must spend 2% of GDP on defense. We have 2025, and until last year, about 22 spent that amount of money on defense. Now I think 6 are not spending that. So Americans have a legitimate concern, saying you develop your economies, you reinvest the money for growing your companies, and you do not provide enough or hardly anything into protecting Europe from potential invasion. I mean, don't forget. I mean, let's go back to the basics. NATO was formed in 1949 as a defensive alliance against the Soviet Union. It's not against Martians from space, no, against the Soviet Union. And it remains an alliance to protect Europe from the Russian Federation. Russian Federation has invaded a number of countries since 2008. And of which we don't talk about much, including Georgia, and still occupied Georgia, of course, Ukraine, not to mention Chechnya and so on. Therefore, Europe has to step up. Yes, in Europe, it's the perception of Russian threat differed from country to country. The northeastern flank of Europe, of the NATO alliance, had a very clear perception of danger. That is the Scandinavians, the Baltic states, and Poland. We always had a very good idea. So the reason Poland was singled out as the model partner is because we spent 4.7% of our annual GDP on defense, and we are going to increase it to over 5% over the next few years. Last year we spent over $30 billion buying American arms. We contracted about 350 Abrams, some of them already tanks, some of them already with us, and the newest version being produced. We are buying 500 HIMARS, we're buying 96 Apache helicopters, we're buying Patriot missiles batteries, and quite a few other things. We are also buying nuclear power stations from the United States. We are buying LNG gas from the United States. And the weapons produced for us are produced in almost 20 US states, which means we give jobs to Americans. So we are very good partners. So I would say there is an attempt of some foreign states to change this multilateral rule-based order into going back to spheres of influence. And that was said straightforwardly last year, I heard it, by President Xi Jinping. We would like to remodel the spheres of influence. But when I talk to my Asian colleagues, they do not agree with the 9 lines. They do not agree that 90% of South China Sea belongs to one country. They do not believe that there shouldn't be a freedom of the sea. And that's why we formed alliances with Korea, with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand, and we have a comprehensive agreement now with India since last year, and we are going to cooperate in a variety of spheres as well. So it is not inevitable. I'm not and never was a Marxist. I do not believe that inevitability of the movement of history. No, there isn't such thing. If we work, it won't happen. If we don't do anything, it will happen.
But quick follow-up on that. Russia would say that there's nothing to fear, and that is what they've been saying repeatedly, and President Trump seems to be agreeing with that there is no fear. It all started because some wrong decisions have been taken about expanding Europe and expanding the EU particularly, and expanding NATO successively right up to Russia's borders. So stop that and everything ends.
And so I'd like you to look at the atlas of the world history. And where was Russia in the 15th and 16th century, and it's Russia now? Russia was so terrified of being invaded that enlarged its land area by half. All of a sudden, they are not just in Muscovy, but they got as far as the East German, West German border. And it's all the time because they were scared of being invaded. When was last time Russia was invaded? It was in 1941 by Germany. Since 1941, Russia has invaded and incorporated a variety of countries. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia as it then was, Eastern Germany, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, not to mention some other parts. So why is the country which for the last few centuries lived through invasion, aggression, occupation, and destruction of various populations, why there are no Crimea Tatars in Crimea? Because they were removed from there by the Soviets, by Stalin, and sent to Kazakhstan to die. I mean, so who is on the defensive here? Well, we are. NATO was formed to be a defensive pact against the Soviet Union, not an offensive pact. Could we defeat Russia as NATO? Yes, probably yes. But we never had an idea like that.
Stephen, can I bring you in at this point of time? There is, yes, all around this panel, there is going to be anxiety about the changing stance and whether there is a method in the madness or there is madness in the method. Or there is no method to what has been emanating out of Washington, D.C. For the last couple of months. Now, do you have anything to alleviate or give an idea of a sense of direction as to where this is headed?
So you want some therapy?
Yes, we all desperately need therapy.
So my first recommendation would be to have some sense of greater context here. Of course, there's huge disruption happening in the world today. All of us see it. It's uncomfortable for many countries. It's uncomfortable for me at times, but that's the nature of disruption. But the disruption is coming from some deep historical directions that have been part of the United States foreign policy since the very founding of our country. The reluctance to be entangled in the affairs of other countries is a central hypothesis of American foreign policy since the founding of our republic 250 years ago. You also have undeniably pressure for this disruption emanating from Washington, D.C., but it's coming from many other sources as well. You've got revisionist powers like Russia that are seeking to relitigate the post-Cold War international order. You've got countries like China that are gaining enormous economic and military influence in relative terms with the rest of the world. There are a lot of drivers for this that are happening today. But the U.S., of course, has been seen as a bulwark against those kind of disruptions, and now the United States is part of them. The disruptions will play out across many fronts. I think in some places more noticeably than others on multilateral action and international agreements on normative behaviors, for example. I think there's going to be a lot less enthusiasm in the United States as reflected by the policies of the current administration. On defense agreements, on bilateral and multilateral defense agreements, I think they're going to be subject to a test of whether or not all parties are contributing in a manner that creates a balance of both security consumption and security production in these. This will play out over the next several years. I think there's disruption is going to be unsettling for all of us. Disruption runs up against many forces of resistance, including nostalgia, including our personal investments in building the institutions and the world order as it exists. But above all, I think the most unsettling or anxiety-producing part is the lack of coherence, the fear of what is the ultimate goal. Are these institutions being reformed? Are they being improved? Or are the ineffective multilateral bodies and treaties and agreements being discarded? Or is there a vision for a world that delivers security and peace through other means? And I think it's fair to ask for that kind of coherence, but the honest truth is disruption doesn't usually produce that up front. That evolves from a period of disruption, and so it's a matter of working through this. But herein lies the answer to those anxieties, and this is for all countries around the world, that have a plan. What are your interests? How do you advocate those? And that goes for the policy debate inside the United States of America. For those of us who are either officially or on the outside, indirectly part of that debate, is have a plan. What do you want that world to look like? And I think you'll find that is the principal way to ameliorate the anxiety that comes from this period of disruption.
You mentioned revisionist forces, revisionist powers in the world. Today, I think the US also is a major revisionist power. In fact, has been a revisionist power for quite some time when the multilateral system has not suited itself. That is why there is a certain threat hanging over treaties, alliances, stress in Europe, stress in Taiwan, stress in Japan. Now, in this kind of a situation, is there anything which can be done to bring some trust and normalcy back? Well, how can alliances and treaties be reshaped? I mean, that is one of the questions we are also asking. How can they be reshaped to handle this world?
Yeah, so I think as Americans, we have to be very self-aware that we project a self-image that's not always seen the same way by countries around the world. I remember as a senior diplomat in the first Trump administration, approaching a longtime friend who was a senior diplomat in Europe, and in a quiet moment over dinner, asking him, how was America First playing in his country, and he said, well, what do you mean? Somewhat quizzically, and I said, well, do you see this change to America First as being unsettling to you in the traditions of how we've engaged with your country in the past? And he said, you've always been about America first. And it was a real wake-up call for me at that moment, that we have to be careful that we don't project a self-image that we are simply an altruistic power and assume that everyone else sees us that same way. And so, I think the first part for Americans is to be a little bit self-aware of how we're received around the world. But also, this could end up producing a new era of peace and stability, but I couldn't come here today and tell you everything is definitely going to be all right. We don't know. And different countries will orient themselves against these trends in different ways. And you mentioned again the revisionist powers. The revisionist powers resent this liberal world order that has existed really for the past 75 years. And so they're going to be very happy to see it go away. And the United States might at times appear to be working in concert with those revisionist powers. You've heard it already. The United States and Russia voted the same way on a UN Security Council resolution on Ukraine. This causes alarm in some parts of the world. But that's the revisionist powers. There's also a set of liberal powers. Here I think especially about the European Union, but Canada, other countries that are very much in the hot seat today, as a matter of fact. These countries have built their entire identity. Their entire operating systems are baked into this liberal world order, so this disruption is hugely problematic for them. But there's also a third set of countries, and I kind of count India in this one too. And that's countries that have found the liberal world order to be a benign environment in which to advance their own aspirations. But deep down inside, they actually don't consider themselves to be part of that liberal world order. And they have a lot to worry about too. Not just the Europes and the Canadas of the world, but non-aligned countries in the Gulf states, India, that stable international order that has been created by this liberal order that's existed for the past 75 years has provided a very safe foundation to project one's own policies, whether those are transactional, self-interested, or selectively engaging. And here's an area where I think will be real growth, incidentally, is coalitions of the willing, loose, organized sets of states like the Quad, like AUKUS. I think that's the trend of the future. And I think all that works well, but we should be mindful that without the foundation of that liberal world order, there's going to be a lot of new variables that all of us are going to have to take into consideration.
Thanks. Caroline. Your turn. I'm not going to ask you about the anxiety in Europe. I'm going to ask you a different question. Wall Street has been tanking for the last few days. And we suddenly find that Germany is doing very well. The stock market is rising. It seems Trump has been good for Germany. Can you explain?
Well, I think we will see about that. Let's see. I think there's certainly, I think we've seen very positive or more optimism in Germany with the new government forming. I mean, we're still at the process of the coalition negotiations, but I think the signs that we've seen in terms of the massive investments that are planned both in infrastructure but also in our defense capabilities and to make the fiscal space for that, I think is very positively perceived by the economy and is something that a lot of businesses in Germany have been calling for a long time. Whether or not, I mean, I think, building a little bit on what Stephen was saying, I think what we're seeing is that the US is undermining the very system that has made the US very powerful. The liberal world order was created by the United States after World War II. A lot of the international institutions, the dollar as the main currency and so on, all of those things are very much working in favor of the US. And it's certainly, it's distressing to see that that is being undermined from within, if you want to put it that way. But I think it also has a lot of, there's also a lot of opportunities within that, right? To reshape that, to maybe make the international system a bit more legitimate, have different powers, have a say and a seat at the table as well. And I think for Europe, I very much agree with Stephen. We need to have a plan. We need to look at our own interest. I think we should really take stock at all of our partnerships, and I think it's something which I would love the new German government to do, to really look at all of our partnerships, think about, why do we have partnerships with them? What's our interest in that? Is it values? Is it interest driven? And also, what do we bring to the table? What can we offer? And really take stock at that and rethink those partnerships. I think in this world order that is emerging now, I think the answer can't be, oh, we've always done that, so we continue to do that. I think that's not good enough, and we need to build on those partnerships. And I actually think to maybe counter some of the, short-termism, transactionalism, I actually think in the emerging world order that we're seeing, trust and reliability is going to be a prime currency. Because why would you invest in partners which you can't trust and which might abandon you quickly? So I think actually there will be a lot more willingness to invest in those that you think you can trust and that you think you can rely on. So I think it's not just all about short-term interest.
So this idea of burden sharing has actually been a good thing which has happened, and these alliances can be reframed. Investments are kind of booming, businesses are happy. But the counter question to all that is, there is definitely 5% of the budget is going to be spent on defense. That money has to come out from somewhere. Yes, if it's a European system of defense, ECB can print more euros and then go down the path the US has gone down for many years. That's one answer. But for Germany, how frank is the government? How frank are politicians about what costs are going to be involved? What is going to be the pain of these adjustments which are going to have to be made? Otherwise, you have problems.
I think this is the question that the new government or the coalition that is forming is trying to address through the loosening of the debt brake. Creating more fiscal space for that. There's a lot of debate whether or not that will be enough, but basically all defense spending above 1% of GDP will be outside of the debt brake, so there will be possibility to borrow more money. And I think that's the effort of the new government, kind of looking off where the old government has had problems to agree upon, to not pull one issue against the other, and to make sure that there's not a lot of hardship on citizens. Whether or not that's sustainable in the long term, I think we'll have to see. I think this is why the investment in infrastructure is so important to boost the economy. I mean, we've had almost no growth for a number of years now. So I think unless the economy really picks up, I think it's going to be difficult to sustain a certain level of government services and also increase those other spendings.
Well, you've been looking closely at Russia and China, and I think you have pointed out in certain places that the Russia-China nexus is becoming and posing a greater and greater threat to the Western alliance. And yes, many strategists have been saying that the best way out would be to create a split between Russia and China, and maybe Trump is trying to do that. But what seems to have happened is that the exact opposite. The split has happened, but it's happened across the Atlantic, between the US and Europe. How do you explain this?
I think it might look so. I'm a little bit more optimistic. And let me start by saying that, what we're seeing in Europe is that the entire security architecture of Europe has been shattered after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last 2 years. So we're not in business as usual. Sometimes in these conversations, it looks like we're repeating the very same things of the first Trump administration or previous administrations, but actually for Europe, things have changed. And so if I want to simplify it, this security architecture that was based on three main pillars, security, getting it from the United States, and we discussed the burden sharing argument that's actually old as NATO itself, then getting cheap energy from Russia, and of course, cheap products and big markets in China. That has all changed for the European Union. And so we have to look at all these perspectives. Now, Russia and China are strange bedfellows. However, we have seen a closer alliance, closer partnership over the last 2 years, no limits partnership, just in terms of visits. There have been more than 45 visits of the two leaders just in the last 2 years. And what they have in common, I think for Russia, is the disruption of the rules-based international orders, Western one. And for China, they actually, the partnership with Russia, it's against the West, but they still want to keep this rules-based order, but just change the rules according to their own benefits. So I think this is, where we look at this partnership. What will happen? We don't know. I think it's too early to say which direction it will go. Of course, I think that the most important thing to do is really keeping this transatlantic alliance, the cohesion in the transatlantic alliance. I think that's how both the United States and European Union increase the bargaining power, both with China when it comes to trade policies, but also when it comes to the security perspective to Russia. So I think let's look long term, and I think that we should not judge, but just by some narrative of the recent weeks.
So that brings me to my follow-up question to you. There is a worry that the stoppage of multilateral development assistance aid programs coming out of the US is actually extremely counterproductive then at a time when there is in the rest of the world a huge demand for the the state-led investment model, which China is very good at, right along the PRI. So is it not that they are getting a raise out of this? Are they the winners of this game?
Well, I agree with you. And I think, that's where not just now with cutting of those programs, but even before in the last 10 years, we have not been very good in strategic communication. We have not been very good to talking to people inside our own countries about the problems, but then also increasing outside influence. So I think that we might have some really negative repercussions going forward, but still goes back to the question that I think we overlook the importance first of the transatlantic alliance. We focus on issues that are related to trade, and trade is not the most important element that keeps the transatlantic partners together. It's mutual investment. That's more than $6.5 trillion. And there's where prosperity and benefits for the transatlantic alliance come. We're not talking about that. We focus on some trade issues and tariffs. Talking to people and creating this narrative for the future, I believe it really will be key.
Okay, we are nearing the time when I should open this up for questions. So start thinking of our questions. We'll have very short time. So spend these next 2-3 minutes trying to make them as sharp as you can. Right. Meanwhile, just one quick question from what Val said, and that is to all of you. We're talking about investments across cross-border investments, cross-border flows, lots of things happening, markets, trade. My question to all of you, in very, very short answer before I open this up to all of you is globalization really in retreat? Is this the end of globalization? What does it mean for the rest of the world? President Shu, yeah, sure.
Yes. Honestly speaking, my personal view is there is a certain degree of truism of the Trumpist foreign policy framework. The thing is, free trade is difficult to sustain without fair trade, especially in the global scale. So my take is that free trade can only be sustained with partners that share mutual trust. So, but bilateralism is not a solution because it will only lead to inefficient economic system. So I guess would be better if we could have what I call a block approach of limited free trade within a certain group of partners that share mutual trust. So the best policy will be to increase the embeddedness of mutual interest with increasing number of partners that you can trust. And I think that will probably be a direction of the evolution of global trade.
Władysław, building partnerships, building cross-partnerships across, as far as the larger ideas are concerned, within Europe itself, there's a lot of division. I think even the Visegrad states do not have, between the four of them, do not have the same idea about how Russia should be handled. Now, how do you build a kind of framework for these alliances?
First of all, I would not give up on all alliances. I think the North Atlantic Treaty Organization still works and still consistently works. The EU, we agree, there are 27 members. Generally speaking, 26 agree on almost everything and one doesn't. And now we have decided to do everything to bypass that one because otherwise we cannot function. Yes, and in various matters to do with security, we are now constructing coalition of the willing, and we have formed informal, within even NATO, we formed an informal alliance which consists of the UK, Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, and Romania. And if the others don't want to follow, that's too bad. But we are having a consistent policy together because we realize the threat. There is no international trade, free trade, without international law. This will not happen. We'll go back to Colbert and mercantile style of trade. This is counterproductive long term. Yes, we have to fight this disruption which was mentioned, and this disruption is basically caused by what I call as axis of upheaval, which consists of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Well, how are you going to deal with Russia, which is supplied by China with dual-use goods? 80% of all dual-use goods reaching Russia come from China. How are you going to deal with Russia, which is using North Korean troops on European soil and producing nuclear weapons aimed at Japan and South Korea? How are we going to contain Iran, which is supported by Russia? I mean, this is not necessarily a logical scenario here. Yes, in worst comes to worst, there will be lots of small and larger alliances. Rammstein format, which is the only purpose of the Rammstein format, Rammstein from the American base in Germany, is supposed to provide military support to Ukraine. It consists of over 50 countries from all continents. That is another form of alliance. So I think we'll keep it going, come what may.
Steve.
So I agree with Vali on the absolute central importance of the transatlantic alliance for the security and in the broader interests of both the United States and Europe. And the concern that I think about a lot is whether or not it's possible for us to sustain at the same time that strong security and defense partnership at the same time that these coercive economic measures are employed. Can countries continue to muster the national will to partner with the United States of America at the same time that we're imposing crushing tariffs on their domestic economies? And I worry about that because I think the greatest loss to America from this period of disruption would be losing the confidence of our allies and our partners in the world, because that is a huge competitive advantage for the United States in continuing to protect our interests, but also the collective interests of this liberal world order. The alliances are the unique feature of the U.S. ability to project this security around the world. And if we lose the confidence of our allies and our partners, I worry that the damage will be significant, not just to our partners and allies, but to American interests as well.
Caroline.
Maybe I can exactly build on that point. I think also the short-term deals or the transactionalism, I think there is this notion that this is maybe like the business way of doing politics, right? And that this is like, you get a better deal out of it. But actually, I think it's very bad for business. I mean, you mentioned earlier the stock market in the US. I think businesses value certainty. They value long-term planning, so they know which markets they can go into, which supply chains they can rely on, so they can make their investments accordingly. And I think it's the tariffs, the economic measures that we're seeing. I think it's very bad for business, and maybe to some extent it's in a world where we have different blocks that we will see a lot more of that. So I think globalization is being rewired. You won't have free access to all markets, and there will be tariffs and sanctions. But I think that makes it even more important that in the alliances where we share the same values, where a lot of companies work across borders, that we shouldn't make the economic barriers too high, and that we should work together and facilitate more trade. And I think also open up to new markets, right? I think it's very positive. I mean, it only took 20 years to get Mercosur from the European Union, get that agreed. I know the European Commission was just recently here in India, so I think it's very important that we open up to new markets and use those opportunities as well. So I think that can also be more globalization in those markets as well.
Well, last word.
Yeah, well, I have 3 points.
No,
the first
no
one,
time for 3 points. Okay, go on.
Okay, good.
Quickly.
Globalization. I think that we have not actually seen deglobalization. We have seen fragmentation because world trade is increasing, but it's fragmented, I would say, in 3 main groups, the West, China's, and then those in between. And then, of course, some of the institutions need to be reformed. WTO, it needs reform. It's not working. It's now, 175 countries, and it started with only, 30-something. So, of course, some of the countries, such as China, came in and took the rules that the West had decided, and then started shaking those rules, and now they want to make the rules. So that's the question, and that's why I agree with Steve that alliances are so important, because whose rules are going to govern the world economy, and that's the main question. And if you allow me, globalization is about choices too. It's about freedom. It's freedom to choose your partners. It's opportunities to collaborate with others to offer more choices to people. But it's also about freedom that's conveyed by sovereignty that countries have, and then of course freedom of principles, which is the most important one, and having a free and fair trade.
Thank you everyone. Now, quick show of hands for questions. Okay. Right over there. Please introduce yourself quickly.
Hello, Teresa Fallon, Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. Thank you for the excellent panel. I have a question for Stephen and one for Valina. Can you give us your insights of how Washington, D.C. will respond to the potential embrace of China by Europe. We saw Ursula von der Leyen say this at Davos, that Europe has other options. They can restart perhaps a comprehensive agreement on investment that's been put in the deep freeze. And Velina, I have a question for you in regard to the amnesia Europe seems to have in regard to China's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. You mentioned the dual-use technology that China is supporting Russia, but the Europeans tend to not want to think about that. I even had a chance to ask Joseph Borrell why, and he said things could be worse. So how
Okay, yeah,
is this
we
going
got your
to happen?
questions.
Okay, thanks.
Over there.
Thank you very much. Patryk Kugiel, Warsaw University, Poland. We've heard very interesting discussion about the revisionist powers and disruptive powers and reformist powers and status quo powers. And in this context, it would be lovely to hear your views. How do you see India as a partner for Europe to save and defend the liberal international order, or maybe the one with which Europe can reform the institutions and the liberal order, or maybe something in between, maybe a disruptive power? What's your view on the role of India?
There was one question here. Keep hands up. I'll just collect a
Hi,
couple more.
Ashish Goel from OMERS, the pension fund from Canada. Quick question for Szu-Chien. It's been said for the last couple of years that Russia can't be allowed to get away with aggression because what message does it send the world? Looks like we might be ending towards the end game, which might be a bit different from what people would have ideally liked, the liberal world order. I'm just curious as to what lessons China takes away from that and what that means for Taiwan, not just for you but for the panel. Looks like we're ending up in a situation where it could be quite precarious in terms of the lessons taken away from China from what's happening in Europe.
Okay, let's get back to the. Oh yes, okay.
Very quick one, Ilva Tare from Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. Ambassador, you mentioned the importance of the alliances, but my question, and Val mentioned that too, on what principles will these alliances be forged now? We are hearing less and less about liberal democracies, and we're hearing more about constitutional democracies. How that will condition the new alliances or the existing ones?
Okay, to the panelists, who would like to start?
I'll start on China and alliances. On China, I actually think some of the best thinking on China has been coming out of Brussels. And I think President von der Leyen has been one of the best voices on leading us towards a transatlantic consensus on China. I'm not worried about a competitive Europe seeking to find advantage in China because it's affronted by the United States of America, because Europe is going to act on Europe's interests too. And at the end of the day, Europe and the United States are going to be in very similar places on China policy because their interests align very closely on this. On the alliances and organizing principles, first of all, I think we have to recognize that the formation of mutual defense agreements and the type of security alliances that exist in the framework that exists in the world today, with the United States at the center of many of those, is a phenomena of the post-World War II era, the immediate post-World War II era, arguably the vulnerability of a defeated Japan and also the out of the ashes of a terrible war on the Korean Peninsula. But I don't expect those kind of alliances to become commonplace again. I think much more likely are going to be the looser alliances of countries like, and not even to call it an alliance, but the looser groupings of countries like Quad and the AUKUS, I think are going to be the pattern of the future. In that case, it's going to be around shared interests, in some ways shared interests more than shared values, quite honestly. And that may be the key difference between those two different eras, is that if alliances like NATO were built on both shared interests and shared values, I think the trend of the future very much is going to be more exclusively shared interests.
Maybe I'll just follow up on the China question. I believe that we have seen a revolutionary change in the diplomatic language of the European Union when it comes to China since March 2019. And that's been pushed by the European Commission. I believe in the last few years we have seen some trends of convergence in terms of interest and the way that China has been viewed in the transatlantic community. Going from COVID-19, that was the first push from China's muscular, diplomacy that put into question also the entire question, of globalization and Russia's, support, China's support on Russia. So there have been trends in the past, although there are still areas that are some divergence when it comes to technologies, because we know where the European Union stands in terms of competitiveness, and that's the main question for the EU going forward. But then there are areas of asymmetric interest, and that it was mentioned in one of the questions is the security perspective, that the United States sees China as a security threat, and that's not the case in the EU. What I believe are the biggest challenges going ahead for the European Union and the transatlantic coordination is that there are three main gaps in Europe. The first one is between the business community and the political and security community that sees China differently over the last few years. The second one is between the European Commission and then member states that might have vested interest in collaborating, having stronger collaboration with China. And then the third gap is between institutions and public. We have more than only 30% of the publics in the European Union that sees China as a security from the security perspective. So I think going forward, those are some challenges that will affect transatlantic coordination on China, but also the biggest geopolitical trend of where the United States will stand in terms of the interest in Europe and engagement in Europe.
Finally.
Yes. I guess Xi Jinping is waiting for the result that the Russian won't be blamed and won't have to pay too much for their invasion, so that there will be a good precedence for the invader, so that the China may think about taking Taiwan and eventually get away with it. The thing is, first of all, we never doubt that China's ambition to not only take Taiwan by force, but that's only the first step of its geopolitical ambition. And as you can see, their frigates right now are circling Australia, conducting live fire drill in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. What interest does China have over there? Actually, China is projecting its force far beyond the first island chain. This is much serious than we thought. The second thing is,
I'll have to stop you here because we're going to be kicked out of this place very soon. Okay. We ran out of time.
All right.
We actually took some extra time because this timer was not working. So we over-exceeded. So please give a great round of applause to my panelists. They may not have alleviated our stress, but they've at least, in a way, kind of told us stress can be manageable and we can find ways of managing it. If we can manage it, well and good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Just one thought before we leave, and this is not to get into it. It seems to me, and I was taking copious notes, beautiful discussion. It seems to me that the liberal democracy, the idea of liberal international world order has become more of a religion that people are clinging to rather than looking at it from the power dynamic which is coming from United States, Russia, and China. Thank you very much.